going, Al?
Yeah, we shall. You know, everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to tune in. It's something that was obviously on the mind and heart for Jesse and I, and we both understand how emotionally charged a topic like suicide can be. And it was really important for Jesse and I to just create a space where everybody can potentially be seen, heard, ultimately supported. So as we share a few things that we've gone through personally, professionally, definitely feel free to comment as you will. We'll try to address it. Jesse and I have no fixed agenda. We're just going to see where it goes. So with that, I'll just share a little bit about my experiences, and then Jesse, maybe if you want to share some of yours, we'll see where it goes. And man, it's really hard. My personality is one that's very dynamic, and it's very hard to just boom jump into the topic of suicide. So I'm sitting here now, and I'm struggling already. I think that I never had a brother. Justin Andres was the closest thing to a brother that I ever had. And we had such similar struggles, whether it was mental illness or addictions. And I actually took him to his first AA meeting. And, you know, I remember so vividly, sometimes in life you get a call that you never forget. And of course, that was one of the calls when I found out that my best friend Justin died by suicide. And it changes you, doesn't it? I mean, everybody's tuning in because you've been personally touched. And for me, it just felt like there was this 1,000-piece puzzle that got thrown onto the ground. And I was left with maybe 500 pieces. And I'm trying to make sense of everything. And I just, of course, there's this rush of emotion. And hindsight's 2020. At the time, I was an addictions counselor. I was trained in all this, so I was kind of beating myself up. But then I can look back and I can think, you know, I did see this coming. But denial is a great place to live, isn't it? And I guess I just didn't want to accept what I probably already knew was reality. And looking back in a twisted way, it was one of those events that totally put me on a very different path. Because with suicide, I mean, I saw the effects that suicide can have, you know, and I felt it. And I realized I am never going to go down that path. The problem for me was that first year after this loss, I would say I was consumed. Consumed is the best word. Like, you know, it was so invasive. The shoulda, coulda, wouldas, the blame, the guilt. The catalyst for me to let that go was on the 1-year anniversary of his passing. I just wanted to reflect. I felt the best way for me to connect with him was to just go to the gravesite and have a conversation. So right before I left, my wife, Tanya, she says, "Hey, Al, hang on. I have a gift for you. I made something for you." So, okay, I remember going downstairs and Tanya hands me this large gift bag. And from the gift bag, I pull out a picture frame, a large picture frame, and it's full of pictures of Justin and I in it, like a good a keepsake. And so I take this picture frame with me. I drive out and I sit by Justin's grave and I try to put this picture frame up, and immediately it slams down. So again, I carefully try to put it up, slams down. It's not even windy. And the third time that I put this picture frame up and it slams down, now I'm mad. And I remember standing up, I opened my arms and I said, "What's going on?" And the crazy thing is I got an answer. I mean, I heard it clear as day. And what I heard was one word: enough. Enough. And I knew what that meant. For me, it meant enough, Al. You have spent so much time, so much energy thinking about maybe what you could have done. You know what happened? You lost out on the journey that you were meant to lead. And that was massive. Like, the pain does not stop, as you all know. But there comes a time when, you know, there's a good proverb that says, "Let go or be dragged." And that was a time for me to really surrender. We truly, in my opinion, cannot take ownership of the actions of others. And I remember speaking with an elder who I respect, and initially I said to her, why him? Like, why was I saved time and time again? Why are other people saved and why was he not? And her response was perfect. And she said to me, Al, you have no right to ask that question because he has his journey and you have yours. So I've taken that with me. There really is only so much that we can do, only so much that we can say in those moments, but it's the intuition that I've learned to embrace, to hang on to, because if we think that there's a problem, there probably is. And so the biggest change for me is to recognize what's in my control and what's out of my control. Jesse, I know that you made a beautiful post today with Gabe, and I appreciate that. And I'm just gonna hand it over to you to share some of your experiences.
Al, thank you for sharing and opening up and sharing a little bit about Justin, and we'll definitely come back and revisit. I have some questions I'd love to ask of you, and for everybody just tuning in right now, there's no real agenda for this night. What we're going to do is we're just kind of sharing personal stories right now, and we'd love to answer some questions from any of you that you have. You can either ask both of us, you can ask one of us, stories about what you've gone through, what you're going through, if you have someone that you're concerned about, if you've lost someone, if you just want to share a bit of your journey and have it passed on amongst the group and be seen, heard, and loved on a little bit. And that's what this is for. So please don't shy away in the comments. Contribute as much as you'd want. We'll do our best to answer any and all questions that come through. And if we miss some of them for some reason, we'll do our best to circle back around and answer them, especially if you're watching this on a replay. Similar to Al with his journey, mine was one where, to be honest, I struggled with suicidal thoughts most of my life. And I had actually attempted to take my life when I was about 8 or 9 years old. And when I realized that I was not able to go through with it, I'd gone down to the woods behind where I grew up. And I was sobbing uncontrollably because I did not want to die, but I felt like I needed to. I felt like I had to. I had so much shame and guilt and pain I was carrying around. And I felt like I was just hurting people that I loved and cared about. And when I got to the point where I made that attempt, I was trying to push this knife through my heart. And it wasn't easy, like it seems like it would be in the movies. In the movies, they make life and death seem like such a simple exchange. And I didn't realize that there's bone and muscle and tissue that you have to push through. And so I pushed harder and I cried more. And when I finally broke through the skin and saw my own blood, I realized I couldn't do it. And I remember falling on the forest floor, sobbing. And now where I once just felt like I had this responsibility to die, it was now replaced with a magnified amount of shame and guilt, feeling that now not only was I not able to do it, but I was a coward and was going to be a burden to all who knew me for the remainder of my life. That carrying that around, that thought was never far away from my mind, that those feelings were never far from my heart. And that really was a burden I bared for much of my early life. And it was interesting too, because actually growing up, there was a kid in my junior high class who ended up taking his life. And it was interesting because I had carried that pain so long, but when he took his life, I didn't necessarily recognize his pain and mine in a similar way. And later on, after high school, this girl who I grew up with, one of the most popular girls growing up, blonde haired, blue eyed, typical kind of what you'd call the all-American like girl. And she ended up taking her life shortly after high school. And the same thing, like, I remember the last time I saw her, just seeing this deep amount of sadness in her eyes. And I had come back from college And I'd been working out now, so I had muscles and stuff. And this was the middle of winter where I grew up, and I heard she was working at this store. So I went and worked out first. So I had a pump. And I wore my skimpiest tank top, and I made sure the straps were kind of hanging down so you could see the muscles and everything. And I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to go over and impress this girl that I was always too shy and too self-conscious to talk to. And I remember walking in the store to see her all excited about this, like, practicing my flexing routine, and immediately feeling my heart break because I saw the pain in her eyes. Even then, I still didn't make that connection. It wasn't until later on, and Al mentioned I put a post up about my friend Gabe, and that was my first real deep encounter I had with suicide. And my friend Gabe was going through a difficult time, and he sent me a text message about an hour before saying, "I love you all." At the time, I used to go to the local library here, and I'd spend a few hours every day working from my laptop, and I was in the library. And when I received that message, I immediately replied back and said, "I love you too, man. What's going on?" He didn't respond, so I tried to call him. He didn't answer. And I remember, Al, this moment where I shut my laptop and stood up. And I stood up because I knew in my gut, I could feel what was likely happening. But then I had a voice in my head saying, well, what if that isn't it? What if you're just making this up? What if you're overreacting? And so then I sat back down. I sat back down and actually opened my laptop back up. But before I could turn it on, I had this like voice that just literally a conversation with myself that said, you know what's going on right now. And if you don't act, excuse me, if you do not act, think about how you will feel. Oh, I might have to take a quick coughing break. I ate some popcorn earlier. Hold on one second.
I can't even help you with the Heimlich.
I feel like I just broke one of the golden rules of presenting, which is never to eat popcorn before you're going to speak, because those kernels can have a way of dangling and getting caught on your throat. Popcorn and almond slivers. I can feel it loosening up, but I also feel the lingering tickle of it, which I'm just giving full forewarning that I may have to pause one more time and get 2 final coughs to get it fully dislodged. Anyways, I opened that back up because I had this thought of, if you don't act right now, what are you going to feel? How are you going to carry that for the rest of your life? You know you will regret it forever. My friend and I went looking for Gabe, and we went to his parents' house first. We were about ready to break in the house to find him. That's how concerned I was. And then I got a phone call where he was last seen. And I got there, and right when I got there, Gabe made a choice. And I spent the next several minutes with him and my friend trying to do CPR, trying to save him. He was, the paramedics got there very fast. It was less than about 6 minutes. They got him to the hospital very quickly afterwards, and unfortunately, he was pronounced brain dead shortly after. It was interesting, Al, too, sitting with that, because even still today, some of my most vivid memories are that experience. As we talk about it, I can see everything, I can hear everything, I can still smell everything. And it was I can see the aftermath right now in the hospital. I remember my friend Derek showing up there, and there's one moment where he's over with my other friend who was there with me, and he's grabbing him by the hand. My friend was in this total space of shock, and taking him over to the counter and grabbing some basically wet wipes and kneeling down on the ground and trying to clean the blood off of him. And I remember sitting there looking at this, and in the midst of this like life-changing experience for me, where I was so sad and I was hurting so deeply, I witnessed probably one of the most loving acts I'd ever seen. Seeing my friend kneel down and help clean my friend whose face was literally frozen with what had happened. There was a fallout from that for me. many of my relationships that I had before that kind of suffered. People, we struggled to interact and relate with one another. I think that's something that's often not talked about too, is so much is spent on the loss that we don't often talk about what the fallout is from those losses, how people can struggle to relate to us. I can remember one of my closest friends at the time coming up to me 2 days later. She comes up to me with tears in her eyes. She gives me a hug and she looks at me and she says, I so badly want to help you right now, but I don't know how. And I think her words echoed what many feel when they're on the other side of that too, is that, we have someone that goes through a loss like that. And we want to help them so much because we love and care about them, but we just don't know how. Right? We often struggle with conversations around death and dying under natural causes and normal circumstances, whatever normal is. But then to have it be and act like somebody taking their life, we often don't have language for it. Plus, there's so many different societal views of what it means, what that means for them, all sorts of languaging that goes around that. And that, for me, that was one of the hardest things, is people in my life who loved and cared about me struggling to love and care about me and not knowing how and what was the right way to do that. And what that ended up doing for me is I found myself kind of not focusing on taking care of myself as much because I wanted to make myself okay around them. I went into this caretaking mode of trying to take care of them and pretend I was more okay than maybe I was, to not make them feel as uncomfortable as they felt around me.
Well, Jesse, so then the question for me is what did you need at that time? What could people close to you say to provide some level of comfort, or was there nothing? Like, what were you seeking?
Yeah, that's such a good question, Al. I've had all this time to think about that. And what I'm going to say right now is probably something different than what I was said yesterday or the day before. And as I'm sitting here sharing with you right now, I think just people, just sitting there with me, just being there. I think sometimes it's interesting. Like we want to have the right words, don't we? We want to do the right things, like it's kind of like that puzzle piece. Al mentioned he had this 1,000-piece puzzle and it shattered together. And when we put together puzzles, we're always trying to find the right piece to make it fit together all nice and tidy. But when something like this happens, those pieces shatter and spread, and there's no nice and tidy right away afterwards. What there just is you in the puzzle. And before we can get to nice and tidy, I think the first thing, Al, is just having somebody there to help pick up the pieces. Or even maybe that might be too much at first. And so instead of starting with picking up the pieces, maybe it's just someone there and saying, gosh, that puzzle is a fucking mess now. Because it's real, right? It's real. And I think that it's sometimes too, I don't know if you felt this way, Al, too, but it was like, when I would have almost, I feel like people would lovingly tiptoe. I think it would have been wonderful if somebody would just said that puzzle is a fucking mess, and acknowledged it almost for what it is. But it's hard because I think to most, and that might sound insensitive, it might seem not caring or compassionate, but for me, it felt real. It felt so real in that is the rawness of the pain right here. I had this thing I was putting together and it all just fell apart. And man, that sucks. That sucks so bad that that thing you were just putting together fell apart. Do you want some help in picking up the pieces? Or how can I help you pick up those pieces? Or if you don't even want to deal with the pieces right now, just ask the question, what can I do? What do you need from me? And make it open-ended like that. And sometimes it might be, I might have told you, Al, if you were there and you asked that, I might have said, Al, what really sounds great right now is a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Right.
Right. And it makes really no sense other than that's just what sounds good in the moment.
Right. And I think that everybody's response to that question, Jesse, will probably be a little different. But when I reflect on what I needed in times of despair and talking to other people, what it really comes down to for me is that sometimes we have this innate need to fix, especially men. We want to fix. Mothers, nurturers want to fix. They want to make it better, but the reality is they cannot. And sometimes we then have this natural reaction to deviate, to just pull back because maybe it's too painful for the individual, or they just lack the tools. Now, I think rather than even trying to fix, it comes down to the two most basic needs, which for me is one, see me. I think I just always wanted to be seen. And the second one is I always wanted to be heard, not fixed. And elders always tell us there is a reason that we have two ears and one mouth. And I think just without overthinking or I don't know, talking about this one too much, it's like, just listen. You know, exactly what you said. You can ask open-ended questions, but if emotions are energy, which they are, what a gift we can give people if we just take the time for them to be free from some of that emotion. And we can ask in what ways can we support you, but ultimately, if they don't want the help, that's out of your control, right? Jesse, there's some interesting questions coming in, and thank you so much, everyone, for taking the time to ask some questions.
Al, real quick before you go to the questions, can I just make one more comment on what you said?
Oh, totally.
Let's just be clear what listening is and isn't, because I think sometimes that bears a definition in today's culture. Listening is not, Al, go ahead and tell me something. So Al's talking to me and I'm saying, oh yeah, okay, Or listening is also not, Al, tell me about the weather today. You just go ahead and tell me about the weather.
Oh, you're being serious.
Yeah, okay. I'm being serious. Okay. And
Jesse,
the weather here. So that is not listening either. Waiting for somebody to speak and then you immediately jump in and cut them off because you're filling in the blank.
Right.
What listening is, Al, I'm seriously asking you to tell me about the weather. And then you just sit and you hold that space. And even if it is something as mundane as the weather, you have your heart fully open to receive whatever it is they have to say. And you let them know that nothing on here is more important than what's going to come out of there for them. So anyways, we just want to share. And yeah, Al, you're saying questions now?
Yeah, totally well said. Thanks so much, Jesse, for sharing that and for all of your experiences. Appreciate it. There's a couple of things. The one that caught my attention was this word coward, right? That someone who dies by suicide is ultimately a coward. And there's some interesting comments here. You know, Tyson just chimed in, completely disagree. I had put a post of my best friend's dad talking about the loss of his son through suicide on my YouTube channel. And then a woman chimed in and said that she had lost her son. And shortly after, someone makes a comment saying, your son's an effing coward. And like, oh, okay. So ignorance is a lack of understanding, right? And Jesse, we've talked about this too. It's a good time to then generate some dialogue and some discussion. The truth is that we never will know what somebody else is experiencing. We can try, but we will never know. And I think that sometimes we do a really good job of judging when we fail to just try to have empathy. And I think that sometimes it's just fear, right? Like sometimes the selfishness actually might be more about us than them, because wait, if they do die by suicide, what am I going to do? And all of a sudden we shift the focus to us instead of them, right? I don't know. Coward is a strong word. It comes up a lot. Most of you are totally disagreeing with that. What are your thoughts, Jesse?
Yeah, and I appreciate someone bringing that up because I think that was the one, especially for me early on, I struggled with the most because that was what I'd been taught, right? Is that if they did that, it's the coward's way out and they're going to go to hell and all these types of things, right? When I really sit back and think about it, and especially if I contrast it to my own experience, what stopped me from taking my life as a child was not strength. It was that I was terrified. I was scared to go through with it. And I think about that for oftentimes there was someone earlier who had said they had made an attempt a couple times in their life, and I asked them if they don't mind sharing. And this was in a thread I'd put up earlier, and what was going on, what did they feel? And they said they felt like no one loved them. And I think that psychology is important to acknowledge, because oftentimes when people are at the point where they feel like they need to take their life, or they're at the point where they're considering taking their life, it's often because they feel so much pain that that is, one, the only way out, and two, it will ease the burden that they believe they're placing on the lives of everyone else. I would say that is not an act of cowardice, and under any other circumstances in our society, for us to sacrifice on behalf of others, we'd likely call that heroic. We'd likely call that an act of service, right? It's for us to go without so that others can be better, which is the kind of the framework of it, right? I will remove myself from this so others do not suffer. I see that I believe I'm hurting, and my pain is hurting you, Al, who I care about. So I take my life so you don't have to suffer. And most times in our culture, that if we were to remove that burden that we're placing on somebody else, we would celebrate it. You know, in movies, right? We always cheer when there's the hero sacrifice to save others. But yet when it comes to suicide, there's a lot of language, and I would say probably much of it is outdated around that, calling it acts of cowardice. I would strongly disagree with that. And what I agree, Al, I think there's another piece that too, which you acknowledge, it's that ignorance piece, right? In the sense of, some of us have been blessed to not suffer as deeply as others. Some of us have been blessed to have different sources of resources, different sorts of peer groups, different educational backgrounds, different sets of tools and life experiences, different upbringings and belief systems, where we may not have struggled as deeply as some. And because we haven't struggled or suffered as deeply as some, we can't quite appreciate what life is like through their eyes. And very rarely when we choose to judge others, do we actually take the moment to see life from their shoes, to take a moment to gaze and look at life through their eyes. And I would encourage people to consider this, that the next time they may want to consider placing a label like a coward or something like that on someone, consider looking at life from their perspective. Consider living life in their shoes. And then also ask yourself the question, what would you do for your loved ones? Because most of us would probably respond, like, if I asked you, Al, what would you do for your wife and kids? You'd probably say anything. Well, under that kind of guise, right, many of us will say, I would lay down my life gladly for my loved ones, for my kids, my family, so on and so forth. Again, and that is such a, oh, wow, that makes you such an incredible human being. The psychology is almost the same. It's just not thinking of it. It's thinking of it from a place of pain. And who are we to judge someone else's journey? I know for
Yeah.
me, it doesn't feel good when somebody judges mine. It probably doesn't feel good when somebody else is judged. I mean, what do you think about that, Al? Does that sound?
Oh yeah, man. You just are so spot on, so bang on. Love the way you articulate. Autumn, you just chimed in. Case in point, your sister, who died back in 1989. You just said yourself, she's one of the most courageous women you've ever met. And I think that's that's the point. It's like people who die by suicide fought for so long. There is a fear that comes with carrying out suicide, but I guess the fear of dying eventually isn't as hard as the fear of living, perhaps, right? It's like a tipping point. In those moments, it's like empathy is really hard, because you can't put yourself in someone's shoes unless you've been there, and we truly can never be someone else. But I know that from my experiences and speaking with others, in that place, we are not exactly coherent. And a lot of suicides also involve substances, alcohol, things that help people over the tipping point, if you will. And it's cloudy, and I think that one of the problems is that we isolate. Cindy, you made a point of saying that sometimes you don't actually talk about how you're really doing because you don't want to be a burden to others. Here's what I've learned. Darkness breeds darkness. When I would isolate, when I would withdraw because I didn't want to be a problem, when the family, when everybody's happy, I don't want to contribute negative energy, so I'm just going to remove myself because that's easier. Kind of what you were saying, Jesse. Then I'm doing a service to them in my mind, which is already kind of messed up. But the problem is that when I isolate and when I withdraw, it just becomes darker and darker. When I stop answering my phone, when I stop answering a knock at my door, stop responding to emails, it gets darker and darker. What I'm saying is the only way to ever get out of that is to get into the light. Literally, I had to get out of my house and be exposed to people so that I had the chance of feeling again, because otherwise we get in our heads. And there's a good saying that says, you can let the bird in your head, but don't you dare let it make a nest. And that's the problem that I ran into. My thoughts were my enemy. And I couldn't sort out my thoughts because I'm living in this. And this is not healthy. This vessel is not healthy. So I had to get to the point of reaching out for help, or sometimes somebody would just say what I needed to hear, or sometimes a text came through that really resonated. Some might call that spiritual. But all that I know is silence is not the answer. It has never been the answer. And I can guarantee that there have been people in all of our lives that at some point have probably said, hey, if you need me, call me. Now, you're going to find out pretty quick if they're serious or not. But sometimes in our own head, we think we're a burden. Well, take a risk. And I think I was afraid of taking that risk for a long time, of being vulnerable, of being denied. Because if I'm denied after I reach out for help, that's just going to push me further. But then maybe that's the time to access formal resources like counselors. But I also used to have the victim mentality where, nobody will understand me. Hey, sometimes we just have to, again, take that risk, be vulnerable, seek out those resources. And man, I was pleasantly surprised, as a lot of people are. But we've got to get out of this.
Something you said, Al, too, which I think is worth noting to everybody, it's that there's this fear of taking risks because what's often amplifying those thoughts and feelings is the thought and feeling of no one cares, I'm not loved, I'm not enough, I don't belong. And the risk piece of that is if I reach out and people don't respond, then it serves as confirmation, right? This is important because sometimes what we do, and I'm completely guilty of this too, is I will tell people, hey, I'm here, reach out. But then it's like I put the ball in their court. Okay, I did my part. And I can step away from it. And yes, do people need to take that initiative? Absolutely. But there's a couple of things to consider. Number one, if you're the one wanting to reach out for help, you want to be intentional about who you reach out to. We all have those people in our lives that we can reach out to that will confirm whatever it is we're looking for confirmation about. If I want to go out and have one too many beers, I know exactly which friends will be the ones that will encourage that kind of behavior. The same thing, if I have the friends who would probably give me the worst advice, but that's just what I might be looking for at that point because I'm really beating myself up, know exactly which ones to reach out for that. And I also know which ones will be the ones that hold me accountable and have the tough conversations with me. So sometimes we have to really be intentional about that. And what we might do is, especially if you're in a space right now where you are looking for help and you're wanting to reach out, is take inventory of the people of your life and make a list. Who are the ones who, if you were to reach out to them, are likely going to be responsive, who are likely going to connect? And sometimes this isn't a fun thing to do because we might find that if we have, let's say, 100 friends on Facebook, and there's only 2 or 3 of them that would really be in there. This isn't about a game about having a lot, it's about having the right ones. The second thing is for everyone else with this is, if you have a sense that someone may be struggling, make the effort to reach out. Don't just extend the offer, but actually take the action too. Check up, follow up, check up again. Just send messages. Hey, I'm just thinking about you, here for you, if anything. It takes 2 seconds to send a text, to send an email, to send a messenger. My God, we have 50,000 ways now we can get in contact with one another. But trust in that feeling for yourself. Keep reaching out, keep leaning into it, and make it about them and not about you. Sometimes we can get a little burnt out on reaching out if we don't get the response that we're looking for. Reaching out, again, is going back to that, just holding space for them, letting them know that you love them, letting them know that you care, letting them know that you see them, letting them know that you genuinely are there for them, and that when they do reach out, make sure you honor that. Because sometimes when we're in that space of we're feeling lost, we're feeling those feelings, and we're looking for that confirmation, if someone reaches out to you and you don't honor your word, that goes right into that thought pattern. That bird is nesting even more, like Al says, and that thought pattern goes, well, there's just more evidence of why that bird can take a deeper nest. Al, I'm curious for you, what are the things, so just for people who are here right now and they may have a friend or family member who's struggling, what are some signs that people can be aware of and look out for that could encourage them to reach out more, that would be signs and awarenesses that, hey, maybe this is someone you should lean into loving on a little bit more?
Jesse, I like the metaphor that you used in our previous conversations where you phrased it as though people leave breadcrumbs. And that's beautiful. That's exactly it. And I could give you 15 solid signs, and I'll touch on some, but let me just jump to the number one, hands down. And I alluded to this earlier before. Intuition. We were given intuition for a reason, right? Sometimes we get caught up here, and that has to do with the denial. We can feel and know that there's something wrong, but we don't want to recognize it. Sometimes, in fact, I think we fear asking the question, are you suicidal? Because we fear the response, right? Because if they say yes, then it's real. I think some of the signs, so here's just one with Justin. It was the final farewell. Hindsight, I see it. At the time, I mean, Justin was kind of making his rounds to everyone in that last week. And he came over, and I remember after the last hug, and I said to my wife Tanya, I said, he held me for a lot longer, and he said he loved me, which we always did. And but there's those things that you can look back and see. Sometimes it's the giving away of personal possessions. It's tricky because sometimes people actually become happier, right? Because they know that the pain will soon end. It's so different for everyone. And I think for men, one of the signs is that we're not, like, we suck at talking about our emotions. I shouldn't generalize, but I mean, a lot of men really have a hard time being open and honest and transparent. And so what I found is that even when you ask someone, how are you doing? Or how are you doing today, Jesse? I mean, that's key, using the word today and the name, because that's personal. But if somebody says, I'm okay, and you know that they always are someone who says good, 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 maybe that's as good as they can be at, hey, dropping the big breadcrumb. Maybe I'm okay means I'm not doing well. I'm really struggling. And I think that's what I'm saying. Sometimes we just we shouldn't have to decode, but unfortunately, sometimes we do. And it's not thinking with here, but it's going back to the intuition. sometimes, you know, it's the self-injurious behaviors even. It's like, it goes back to what we said before, Jesse. We all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. If that's not happening, maybe we turn to self-injurious behaviors. We start to cut. And it's like, hey, do you see me now? The hang up for a lot of people is the response, right? They're not sure how to respond. And we've touched on that again or earlier. But what about you? Are there some things that I missed out on?
No, I think you really brought to light, Al, some important things there too. And it's, the intuition piece, it's something I'd encourage everybody to lean into. And the easiest example we've all had with this is when we're at the grocery store and we're in the checkout line, and the clerk is scanning our groceries, and they look at us and they ask us how we're doing, and we just automatically reply good. And then we, of course, then automatically say, how are you doing? And they say good. We have all had that encounter, probably more than once, where either we were not good or they were not good, but neither of us said anything, but we could both feel it. And I want to just share a quick example of this. There was someone in the chat. Autumn had shared a story about Kevin Hines had said when he's having suicidal ideations out in public, he'll even reach out to strangers. And more often than not, he said they respond. They'll sit with them, listen, wait until someone arrives. People surprise you. And I agree. I think that despite some of the stories that we get cooked up and shown on television, I think the majority of people really would want to help and take the opportunity to. I was in a Target or a Target one time, and I was standing in line getting ready and getting the checkout thing. And so that exchange happened. The person asked me, how are you doing? And I said, my good. And then I, of course, went, how are you doing? And they said, good. I felt there wasn't something right there. And and so in my selfishness, I want to go on with my day. I just want to carry on. I don't have any responsibility again, right? But I stopped and took a breath. And plus, there was a huge line. Target can get really busy. And I just said, no, how are you really doing? And it's okay if you're not good. The person took a deep breath, started to tear up, and they said, honestly, I'm not doing well. I just found out my dad his cancer came back and it's not looking good. I said, God, that really is awful. And I said, I know what that must feel like because my dad went through cancer too. And I said, how long do you have to work? What are you going to do when you get home? He said, I'm here. I just started my shift. I'm here for 8 hours. And I said, well, do you have a plan? Do you have people you can hang out with? And they said, yeah, I have some friends. And I said, maybe you can shoot them a text or call them and reach out. And they said, yeah, I'll do that. And I said, listen, all these people in line right here, I know you feel like you have to be someone for them right now, but all of them have had dads. All of them have had parents. And all of them have people in their lives that they're probably worried about their health or their well-being. So you don't have to be good for everyone else. Just be you. And they kind of stopped and took a breath. And they just looked at me and again, tears in their eyes. I had tears in my eyes at this point too. And they just said, thank you. And I said, you're welcome. Thank you for sharing. And I'm, hoping for the best with your dad. To Autumn's point, strangers, we want to help, right? Humans, again, despite what we might see, the images we might see on TV, humans, I think our default is we want to search for things that make us alike. The very survival of our species has been dependent on us finding common bonds and working cohesively together to be able to grow and evolve and form communities. And in that, people will, when the opportunities presented them, more often than not rise to the occasion. And I think sometimes strangers can even be better. I know when I've had some of my most difficult times, I have felt more comfortable reaching out to people who I may not know quite as well than ones I do because of my own shame that I sit with that. And that's okay too, I think. So that's why it's important to have that inventory and just kind of assess who you feel comfortable talking with about, who you don't. Part of the reason Al and I have done this talk is because just in our organic conversations over the last couple of months, and we just met each other, 4 or 5 months ago, but we've had these kind of organic conversations that have woven down this path and has developed a level of comfort and safety amongst one another and trust that we thought, hey, maybe we could do something here and share with everybody and just hold the space for you all. So yeah, Al, I think you covered some really good things with that. And I think a follow-up question to that might be for you is switching roles with that for a minute. If you're the person who is struggling, maybe there's somebody on here right now who's struggling. What do you think would maybe be the greatest need that you would need, or what could be something that I could do to help you?
Well, it's kind of what you naturally do. There's a good line. I don't know the exact number. Maybe 7% of the way that we communicate is verbal, right? 93% is nonverbal. When people say that they're going to be there for you, or that they'll take the time to listen, you modeled that beautifully before, right? And so what I would need is just a safe place where I felt not judged, but I know that somebody was genuinely, actively listening. And I think that's it. See, there's a reason that when I speak with first responders or police officers who go to a call where somebody has maybe made an attempt or is about to make an attempt on their life, when they're driving to the hospital, if that first responder or police officer takes the time to just ask a few questions, get to know the person, have them talk about how they're really doing, the majority of the time when that person gets to the hospital, they say, I'm okay. I feel better. Now, why? It's again, that emotions are energy. And so all that I would need is a safe place for me to release some of that emotion. I didn't always trust people. I didn't want to talk to counselors. I didn't want to talk to people close to me, just like you mentioned. What I learned is that I can tell a piece of paper anything. And so in those moments that I didn't feel like I wanted to actually confide my true feelings to people, maybe it was my ideas of masculinity, or I just didn't feel like it. The truth is, you can tell a piece of paper anything. And I would just write and write and write and write. And when I was done, I would rip it up. I would burn it. Literally, I would go outside and burn it. And what that did for me is the same thing. It was a release. And so the key thing is that we each have to find our own coping mechanisms, our own strategies. When I was a counselor, I would tell my clients, you take everything, soak it all in, and chuck everything at a wall and see what sticks. Because what works for me will not work for you necessarily, but have an open mind. And one of the counselors that I saw, she told me to create a memory box. So when I was struggling, I had a place to go. And in this memory box, I had old notes from times when I was struggling. I had notes of hope. I had images of hope. I had rocks from BC, from a moment in my life where I remember standing at the ocean and I stood back and I thought, this might be what people call peace. This might be what people call happy. And sad that that was foreign. And so I wanted that feeling to last. And I remember I picked up rocks. I might even still have those. But those are the things that I put in the memory box. Pictures of people that I loved, because I would get too much up here. And, if I could go to that box and I could see, because I'm visual, then sometimes that helps us get out of here too. So, the strategies are numerous, but it starts with asking for help and reaching out for help and being done with the isolation and whatever all these negative scripts are saying.
Yeah, those negative scripts too, Al. I think there's something, feelings are not facts, everyone. It's not, feelings are not facts. And Emotions are not identity. Feelings are not an identity. Emotions are emotions. Feelings are feelings. Sometimes when we start to feel sad all the time, we will start to label ourselves as being sad. I am sad, and calling ourselves sad, right? Well, what we actually are is we're actually feeling sad. We're feeling these emotions deeply. So remember that what you feel and who you are two different things. And sometimes the invitation of just looking at that separation can be very helpful. Also, perhaps embrace, one thing I encourage clients to do is embrace emotions as messengers, right? Perhaps our emotions are showing up because they have messages to us, and learn to have a conversation with them. If I'm feeling sad, why do I feel sad? And there might be something that comes up, and if I'm in a really difficult place, it might be because, well, this happened. Well, why did it happen? Well, it's happened because I'm a loser, I'm a failure. Once you get to something like that, right, what's the source, what's the label you're putting yourself as that's putting you and compelling you to feel in such a way? We can then also invite the question of, well, what would it look like if I wasn't a failure? If I wasn't feeling like a failure, how would I feel? And we're able to start to invite in the possibility of something different. The challenge is most of us do not go there. See, a lot of our conversations with others and ourselves, they exist in a very surface, superficial way. I like basketball. I like baseball. Oh, I like chocolate. But we never ask the why behind it. You go to rocks. Oh, hey, that's a cool rock. What do you think about baseball? But when you actually find out the story behind the rock, it's not the rock, it's the emotion and the meaning in that rock. And that's where the key and power of transformation really comes with all of us. Each human being that we interact with is multi-layered. And one of the challenges is we often exist in these first one or two. We don't go deep enough. And if we're willing to invite ourselves to explore deeply, or maybe even a little bit deeper, the gold is usually not buried at the surface, it's buried a little deeper. And that, I think, can become a really wonderful self-care routine too. Having the memory box, I love that. Maybe doing some exercise. And then learning. One of the biggest things for me and really working on my own self was learning to have these dialogues with myself. Instead of just hearing that voice that says, you're a loser, and then me going, you're right, or hearing that voice says, Jesse, you're a total fuck up, and me saying, yes, I am, which is what would traditionally happen. Oh, thank you for pointing it out. Now let's go find the evidence that supports it. Oh, there's evidence there, evidence there, evidence there, all those types of things. What I've learned to do now is when that voice pops up, to have a conversation with it, engage it not as the all-knowing, but engage it as a curious friend. Jesse, you're a failure. Well, why do you think that? Well, because you didn't get this done. Well, why didn't I get it done? Well, you didn't get this done because of this. Well, what should I have done instead? Well, you should probably, oh, well, that's really actually a good idea. Maybe next time I can write that down and I'll do that. That's easier said than done, but it is an opportunity to begin with that practice of self. It's an opportunity to, once we start to look at and release the shackles that bind us between identity and feelings, identity and self-talk, it can become really powerful in giving ourselves a little bit of space to start to see a deeper truth in that those initial messages are not actually what they're trying to say. What they're trying to say is much deeper. It's just in our very limited vocabularies, especially our self-talk vocabularies, we haven't quite expanded enough on how to communicate. Hell, we struggle communicating with others. You think we're going to be able to communicate with ourselves very well?
Yeah. I think, Jesse, you talk about the self-talk. It's fascinating how sometimes we speak to ourselves in ways that we would never talk to anyone else. And I think it has to do exactly what you said. Slow down, stop deflecting. I think we're so good at being addicted to doing that sometimes we just have to stop and look at this. That was my downfall. That was the hardest thing for me because I didn't want to look at this because this was pain, and I didn't have the tools. I felt like I didn't have the tools to look at it. So I'd rather just live out here. But as soon as, like you, I was able to catch myself if it was a negative thought, I had a counselor who told me to write that negative thought down, replace it with a positive, and every time that that negative thought came, I would then habitually replace it. And over time, you know, we have to make these new patterns. It's been ingrained in us for years sometimes. So yeah, recognizing that. I know that we're pretty much up at the hour. Jesse, we could just talk till, well, for a very long time.
Yeah.
But, you know, Jesse, I appreciate you. Wow, that flew by. It was really neat to have so many people join a conversation. Obviously today is World Suicide Prevention Day, but it's my hope that this conversation will obviously just continue. And much respect for everyone for even taking the time to tune in. And I know, Jesse, will kind of go through the comments because it is important for us to make sure that you do feel seen and heard. We don't want you to feel as though you were vulnerable, put something out there and we just ignored it. So we'll be in touch as well.
Yeah, and everybody too, if you're watching the replay on this, please feel free to put questions, comments in there. We'll be sure to stay vigilant on the replay for the next several days. Also, we want to ask too, and just throw this out there, if anybody would be curious about us doing a more formal training on working around this, we could do it as a course or coming in as a workshop to do with different organizations. And we've just been kind of throwing around ideas about how we might be able to serve people who have been affected or are going through something like this, and combining our experiences and our respective trainings to do it. So if you have ideas about that, comments about that, suggestions about it, interests about that, put that in there. Again, we're just kind of being here with all of you right now. And yeah, Al said it too. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate each of you being here. There was quite a few of you engaging in the comments and contributing. Huge thanks for that. Those of you who stuck through this and just watched and listened, thank you so much for doing that and sticking with it. And you know, don't be strangers, reach out. If I could encourage you all to take one action after this, make a list of people you'd like to reach out to, whether you're concerned about them or not. Just reach out to them and let them know that you love them, let them know that you see them, let them know that you care about them, let them know that you hear them, and let them know that they matter. Even though they may not be showing it outwardly, that very notion of you taking the time to care and letting them know that, it could be profound for them. It could be something that pulls them out of the dark and into the light, as Al was talking about earlier, or it could be the thing that just makes the light illuminate that much brighter on their day. So I would encourage you all to do that, and it would be a wonderful testament to your experience here. And most, Al, thank you, man. I appreciate you being here and holding the space and sharing so openly and honestly and authentically. And I think you're such an incredible human being. I think you're such an incredible teacher. And I would regret tuning off if I didn't say this. I think that how you honor Justin and the work you do now and how you show up and you're here for others, it's absolutely incredible, man. And I feel very blessed to call you a friend. So thank you for being here. And everyone, I think that's it for us, right, Al? We did pretty good with the technology.
Jesse, I am shocked, baffled. That was all you, man. Thank you so much. Thanks for your words too. I appreciate it, Jesse. And yeah, somehow we pulled something out of a hat. So hey, now we know the drill. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jesse.